Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app. We're on Red Circle, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. You can also find us on the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn the notifications on. Also, check us out on Off the Floor. That's where you get text directly to your phone from Greg, Alex, Brady, and myself. Bypass Twitter, X, Instagram, and all the other social media apps. You get it straight from us, and you also get insider information, special contests, and more. Go to winnow.app. That's winnow.app/off the floor. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. That includes Prize Picks. Use the code 5 FIVE. Get that initial deposit matched up to $100. You can play the NFL, NBA, MLB, MLS, boxing, MMA. It's all there. Go to prizepicks.com. Use the code 5. That's the important thing, FIVE. Get that initial deposit matched up to $100. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne. Yikes. 5 on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frauds. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the flow playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, inspire, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor here on the Five Reasons Sports Network and the Five Reasons YouTube channel. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at Five Reasons Sports. We got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. And at some point here, joining us right now, is Greg Sylvander. Of course, you can follow him at Greg Sylvander. Special guest today, and this guy's done a great job covering the Toronto Raptors for a very long time. You can find him at SportsNet. His name is Michael Grange. Make sure to check out the article. We're going to talk a lot about it here today. Michael, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Ethan.
All right, so I want to go through your piece, and then obviously with this, and we've been trying to make the case about this for the last 3 months, that everything is fluid, that, this doesn't operate like on a clock. Like one reporter talks to one source, and that's what happened at that minute, right? Like sometimes you're talking to somebody, and this happens to me all the time. You're talking to somebody, but it's something that was actually discussed 4 days ago, 2 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, when I finally started to figure out what was going on between the Heat and the Blazers. It was literally like 7 weeks after their last conversation that I finally got somebody to download it all for me and tell me exactly what went down at the end of Summer League. But your article was informative nonetheless. And as we go forward here, there was more information that's since come out from Mark Spears, from Sean Highkin, others. It's all over Twitter, X, or whatever you want to call it. But I just want to characterize your article correctly. In your view, right now, the Toronto Raptors are very much in on this. Would you say this is not a smokescreen? This is not Masai Ujiri just trying to make it seem like he's doing something because there haven't been a whole bunch of transactions. They are interested in Dame Lillard. Is that your perception of this?
That's my perception. That's what that's what I've been told. I mean, the point you make is there is a bit of a prove it element here with the Raptors when it comes to any of these kind of transactions, these big trades that they're sort of in on or maybe not in on, because they've kind of been towing around a lot of stuff and not a lot has happened. But, the reason you kind of do take them seriously is that the biggest moment, Masai Ujiri traded, maybe the most beloved player in franchise history to win a title. And so, that if the deal is right and there was other subsequent deals around there, he'll do it. But since then, there's been a lot of talk and not a ton of action. I personally don't see a great obvious fit or reason that you'd need to do this Damian Lillard trade from Toronto's point of view. But from what I can gather, that they are interested, they see it as a solution to a lot of their issues. And they're in the mix.
But you made a case in your piece that actually I've been making over the last few days as Toronto has been mentioned more and more in this process. And I just want to say, too, in my conversations with those around the Heat, Toronto wasn't a team that came up a lot as one of the sort of the dark horses. There's a lot of talk about Philadelphia, maybe Milwaukee and some others. We talked about Toronto a little bit because Masai has a history of this. But you made a case, and I again made this point, that this is not 2019. That Raptors team was ready to win right away. They had a very deep roster. They added to it with Marc Gasol and others and ended up cashing with a championship. But they had Kyle Lowry, who was closer to the edge of his prime, obviously, than the one that we've gotten down here in Miami. And they had basically a team that just couldn't get past LeBron for a while. And, DeMar DeRozan was part of that. Unfortunately, as great a player as he was, he didn't elevate in the postseason. And they went out and swapped him and a young center and a first-round pick to get a guy in Kawhi Leonard who had. So I guess, can you sort of elaborate on the case that you made in the piece that, again, this is not 2019 for the Raptors and why this would be different?
Yeah, I mean that the 2017-18 team, not to go too far deep into Raptors history, but it was a 59-win team. And on that team, coming off the bench, were Fred VanVleet, who we all know became an all-star and has gone on to great things. Pascal Siakam came off the bench on that 59-win team, two-time All-NBA player. I was going to say Darrell Wright. His brother, came off
Darrell's close to our hearts.
He's been a 10-year NBA player. Jakob Poeltl, who's at least at worst a league average, maybe a top 10 NBA center. He came off of the bench of that team. That team was loaded. Norm Powell, who we haven't talked about, was the 11th man, and so. When they were made not only the DeMar trade, but the subsequent trade for Gasol, they were dealing from a position of strength. And they had just come off like 3 incredible draft years, not picking high, but just getting real quality throughout the process. And they were able to kind of leverage that depth. This team has been plagued by depth issues almost since they won the title, because Marc Gasol left, no compensation. Serge Ibaka left, no compensation. Kyle Lowry left, some compensation. Precious Achiuwa is the main player back. And now Fred VanVleet has left with no compensation. And they haven't really replenished. It hasn't been a great development or draft story since then. And so, when just like last season, when they look, I had these same conversations last July where the Raptors really thought they could kind of come in and steal Kevin Durant under everyone's nose. And even then, as great as Kevin Durant is, you were looking like, is there enough once you make this trade that this team is going to be a real serious contender afterwards, having leveraged mortgage your future to do it? And so those are the same concerns. Nothing's changed. This team, to me, falls off the table. No matter what iteration this trade might take, you're going to be left with, Dame Lillard, let's just say Pascal Siakam and Scottie Barnes. And after that, your next best player is probably Dennis Schroeder. And after that, that's it. There's some interesting rotation pieces, some depth guys. Okay, fine. But there's no one lurking in that roster that's scaring anybody. And so, but that's not my decision. That's something I think the Raptors, they don't want to rebuild. They don't want to tear it down. They've shown that over and over again. And they feel like if they can, get lucky and be the last team standing in these sweepstakes, that, it's the move they want to make.
Michael, Greg Sylvander here. I joined late, so I didn't get a chance to say thanks for being on the program. And your piece was definitely enlightening today. As I read it, and as we've been talking so far, and you talked about how this is a different time with a different group and what the roster would look like after they maybe made a trade and that they maybe don't have necessarily the depth around that. And you almost answered the question. You're almost such a ninja at this that you answered the question before I could ask it. Because you kind of pieced together what would be left on the roster. And I guess I could do some backwards math to figure out who then goes out. But I'm interested in your perspective, whether it's intel, whether it's just hunch, whether it's connecting dots, because it just makes sense. What do you perceive Toronto's offer? And I say that lightly because I'm not saying that we're talking about a firm offer that we all know about, obviously. But what do you think the framework of a Toronto offer, I guess, from your perspective looks like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it sort of has to kind of be centered around OG Anunoby. And there's a few reasons for that. One is if you're going to make a trade for Dame Lillard, I presume you want to have Pascal Siakam on your team as your number 2. That only makes sense. Also, just reporting around, Pascal is he's 1 year away from free agency. So if you're Portland or any team acquiring, and this has been the case when Siakam was in trade rumors earlier, teams would kind of pick up the phone and check. Is this somewhere he would sign? Is this somewhere we aren't going to trade and this guy's going to bolt on us kind of thing. None of those back channel conversations have been having, at least with Portland, that I know of. And so for those two reasons, I feel fairly confident that Siakam wouldn't be in it, even though it'd be an easy transaction financially. And then the Raptors, Scottie Barnes is their guy. They are going to live and die with him. And he's only going into his third year. I think they still believe there's tons and tons of upside. And so he's not somebody they're ready to punt on. And also, still on his rookie deal, it'd be pretty hard to make a centerpiece deal for, I think Dame's numbers at $42 million or something. Pretty hard to start, trade an $8 million player for $42 million player. Like, it's just, there's so many bodies that would have to move. And so you get to OG Anunoby, who's 25. He would fit in with Portland's timeline. He is a pending free agent, but Portland would have his bird rights and have a pretty clean cap sheet, so they could pay him. I think he fits in on their roster. He fits in on any roster, frankly. And he's making about $20 million. So then it's, okay, so what do we need to get up to the next 42 odd? And, you throw in a Thad Young in his contract. You throw in maybe a Gary Trent Jr. because that gets to the number pretty quickly, although I think the Raptors would want to keep some of his shooting. And then you're looking at picks, and you're probably looking at Grady Dick, the player the Raptors drafted out of Kansas. And then you kind of look at what Utah did to get, when Rudy Gobert was traded. I don't think it's going to be quite as big a haul, just because times are different. But they were looking for a lot of young players in addition to the salary number.
I know Alex wants to jump in, but I just want to get to one mechanics thing here with the picks. Our understanding is currently they would have 2 first round. Oh, is that what you were going to ask, Alex? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Alex.
I can read Alex's mind at this point.
Ethan immediately knew just off my reaction.
It's
Alex, go ahead.
It was part of the question. It was part of the question.
Go ahead.
But as you were about to get into there, and again, thank you for coming on. In your article, because we had heard conflicting information, just reading different people's, people had talked about them being able to offer up to 3 first-round picks, and they only have 2 because of the stepping rule. So you made it clear in the article that they have 2 right now, but can get to 3 if they unprotect the pick that they currently owe to the Spurs, which is currently top 6 protected, if I remember correctly.
Top 6 protected for this year and for 24 and 25. And so, I think the Raptors, presumably if you're trading for Dame, you're pretty optimistic. You think you're going to have a good year. So, the likelihood of waiving those protections shouldn't be that big a deal. If you're, they're going to have bigger problems if they trade for Dame Lillard and the pick that they waive the protections on is going to San Antonio, ends up being in the top 3. I mean, that's a disaster of epic proportion. So I think that's what would happen. So you'd have, you're right, step-in rule. They couldn't trade till they couldn't trade. The 24 pick would convey. They couldn't trade 25. So it'd be a 26, 28, and 30, plus a couple of pick swaps.
So, and thank you for clearing that up, because I myself was a little bit confused about that situation beforehand, and that changes things. So, so that leads into my question, which is, how motivated do you think the Raptors would be to put together a package that includes all those picks, if assuming they take off the protections from the Spurs pick, they're able to offer 3. How motivated do you think they would be to offer a package that includes the 3 picks, Grady Dick, and then I guess OG would make it like the best form of the package, but obviously it doesn't seem like they're at that point yet. It seems like they're trying to get Dame for relative value, kind of like how they got Kawhi a few years back. Like, again, DeMar, Pirtle, and a pick is not nothing, but for a guy of Kawhi's caliber, and after the context of they had been going at it for years, it wasn't working out, they kind of got him for pretty good value. It seems like maybe they're trying to replicate that. Do you think it's like they're trying to not give up everything? They're not really trying to get it to the point where they have to give up OG, Trent, Dick, all 3 picks, and maybe they're trying to get to a place that's less than that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that is kind of their MO. I think that's why they kind of strike out on a lot of deals is they are trying to, they have a perception of value and they stick to it. They're not the ones, okay, whatever, take the extra first. That's not them. But I mean, as you lay out that deal, that's kind of the minimum. And that you need some of those players just to match salary. And, I could see them arguing over picks because, they would be turning around and saying to Portland, look, we're taking $200 million off your books, so this guy doesn't want to be here. Why should we give you everything? An interesting, but I've been thinking about this, and at this point, no one's talking to me and telling me, oh, they're pick negotiations. I'm sorry, that's not, nobody's that inside. But, one way to look at this from the Raptors' point of view is they do go relatively all in. They make this move, and it's not forever. So you get a player who's 4 years under contract. Presuming nothing horrible happens with Dame, he's just coming off of a fantastic year, and nothing horrible happens with Pascal Siakam or any of the other talent. If this thing doesn't work, you can go back to the market, right? This time next summer, well, maybe you can, you can go, okay, we tried, it didn't work. Now we really have to rebuild, and then you can kind of go back in and maybe recoup some of those picks. Just so we saw with Brooklyn. When they were, that was how they recovered when they got rid of KD after the Harden deal. They got, between Kyrie and KD, they all of a sudden are sitting on a huge amount of picks. So maybe that's sort of some of their thinking, that none of these things are forever, and there's always a way to kind of recoup value. But the fact that they're in there and they're into it. They don't want to lose. And they don't want to rebuild, and they don't want to be where they are. So they kind of have to make a choice, and that's sort of where they're at. And this seems to be the best option available to them, and we'll see if they pull it off.
Michael, after a quick break, I want to get into some more general questions here. But one thing I do want to ask here: do you think there's any way that he would throw Barnes in the deal? If it's a deal breaker, because he didn't do it for Durant, right? So do you think there's anything that could motivate him to put Scottie Barnes in this deal?
I would be shocked. I really would. Again, if you don't trade the Rookie of the Year for, Kevin Durant, then when are you going to trade him? Who's your guy, right? So I could see an argument for it. Scottie had a decent second year, certainly not a great second year. You could see OG Anunoby fitting better between Pascal Siakam and Dame Lillard. I think it's a smoother all-around fit. I think OG at this stage, if he's playing off the ball, is better at some things than Scottie Barnes. How useful is Scottie Barnes if you've already got Dame Lillard and Pascal Siakam? That's about 50% of your touches right there, maybe more. So for all those reasons. It's a fair question, Ethan, but just from what I've heard and gathered, not just the last few days, but going back all last season, they really think that there's something, that there's greatness inside Scottie Barnes, and they think that he can be the guy, whether they do this trade or not, can be the linchpin of something special in the next decade. And so I don't think they're ready to move on from there.
All right, I got a more general question for Michael coming after the break, and then Greg and Alex are going to get in a couple things that we're going to let Michael go. But I do want to mention a couple great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network this Sunday. Biscayne Bay Brewing will be out there again. I don't know why this is a 1:00 game, but it's the Bills and the Dolphins for the AFC East lead, basically the two best teams in the AFC right now, it looks like. Join us out at Biscayne Bay Brewing. Of course, this is the only independent brewery in downtown Miami. It's actually the only brewery in downtown Miami, independent and locally owned, the official craft beer of the Miami Marlins and the independent brewing partner of the Miami Heat. They're there every Wednesday through Sunday. But the cool thing is, if you join us, it's down the street from Kasaya Center. When you mention 5 Reasons when we're there, you get a free beer. They've also got a full food menu. They've got foosball. They've got pool table. They've got video games. They got everything there. My daughter actually had a good time there. I did not let her drink any of the beer. She's 9. But check them out at Biscayne Bay Brewing and join us on Sunday starting at about 11:30 a.m. Also want to mention Better Edge. Go to betteredge.com. Use the code 5RSN. Get that initial deposit matched. Oh, not a match. Excuse me. You get $20 right away with 5RSN. And, of course, this is legal sports betting. It is legal sports betting. You don't have any of those issues. They're based in Minneapolis, not offshore. And you can join our contest. As we speak right now, I'm winning. So you can beat us, okay? Because if I'm winning, then certainly it's easy enough to win. So go to betteredge.com. Use the code 5RSN. I want to ask the bigger question here, and I want to make it very clear to the people of Canada and particularly of Toronto. Toronto is a top 5 NBA stop for me. Okay, so everybody who thinks I'm anti-Canada, anti-Toronto, this was one of my favorite stops when I was traveling. I love that city. So this is not personal for me in any way, but we know that some players just don't want to be there, whether it's for taxes, whether it's just, it's just the differences with America in all kinds of different ways. And in some cases, it's just being sort of out of the spotlight. Players have their reasons. Zoe didn't want to be there. Remember way back when? Goran Dragic didn't want to be there. Okay, you mentioned the trade that was made there. Kawhi was there for 1 year, won a championship, and then dipped. Now, Dame is on a 4-year deal. Michael, you and I both know that certain reporters talk to certain people and certain agents. And there was a report that came out last week from a reporter that I greatly respect. But I know kind of what his relationships are. And he made it flat out that Dame was not going to be happy there, that this was one place. This is not me saying it. I got aggregated for some reason, but it was in a story from this particular reporter. Now, Mark Spears has a very good relationship with Dame and has a ton of sources around the NBA. Has come out and said that he would report, that he would not necessarily make it ugly. What do you believe would happen, and how would the Raptors handle it? And if you're in Masai's shoes, do you offer less because of that possibility that Dame's just not going to be happy? Even if he reports, he's not going to be happy.
Yeah, I think, it's a legitimate concern. It's not really just independent of the history, with the Raptors. I mean, as many players have come here without being very familiar with the city or the country and wanted to stay and loved it. Like it is what it is. I don't think it's all that different than any other market, but the reality is, in this case, the signals were put out there that, not only do I only want to go to Miami, but if, for instance, the Raptors were trying to get in on this, I wouldn't report and all of that. So there is some backstory there on a couple of levels, and you'll appreciate this. DeMar DeRozan and Dame Lillard share an agent, Aaron Goodwin. And so when DeMar was traded to San Antonio for Kawhi, not only were there hard feelings between Masai Ujiri and DeMar, and they've kind of they're civil now, they're good, but it's still obviously a pretty foundational moment in their relationship and not a great one. But Aaron Goodwin at the time was on the warpath. I shouldn't say that. Aaron Goodwin was very mad and he was very upset with the way things went down for DeMar. It was Aaron's a great agent because he really, really has great relationships with his players and history with them, and he bleeds when they bleed, kind of thing. And so that was that when all this stuff happened with Dame, that was always the kind of question I had out there. Is there is not many people mentioned it, but there's some pretty bad blood here. My understanding is that it's kind of been, bridges have been built, and and I think it's got to this stage where and the idea of just not reporting, that's just not an option anymore. Ben Simmons, that whole fiasco he went through with Philadelphia, that cost him $20 million, according to my sources. There was a huge accumulating fines, there was salary and all this, and there was a settlement on it, but it still cost Ben a ton of money. And and then when you look at the other language the leagues kind of invoked regarding the new rest policy and other kind of nuances in those regards, the message has kind of been sent is look, you're under contract, you're expected to perform, and if you're not, we're going to hit you in the pocket. And so I think that I would be very surprised on that level if Dame were to arrive and just kind of do a James Harden and just kind of make a fool out of everybody. And I'd also be surprised based on everything we've known about Dame Lillard as a professional. And I don't claim to know him as a person even in this much. But when someone's in the public eye as often and as rigorously as a guy like Dame over 15 years or whatever it is now, you kind of, you'd see the cracks if the cracks were there. And I think it would be a difficult thing for him to come and just make a mess of a franchise. I mean, I just don't think it's in him. So I think between those factors, it's a good point you raise. I think there has been some back channel communications there. I think there is, I think if he were to arrive in Toronto, I think there would be an understanding in advance. And, I think things would unfold in a smooth, professional way.
I find all of that absolutely fascinating to think about in terms of repaired relationships and just how those things work. And if he would ultimately settle into a place like Toronto that has proven that if you come here and buy in, they could get it done. Michael, my question, a lot of people are going to they're going to let out a collective sigh because it's not related to Dame. Just for housekeeping, how would you categorize the relationship between the Toronto Raptors and Miami Heat front office? Just generally speaking, I'm interested from your perspective on how those two organizations coexist.
I think it's good. I think it's good. I think like a lot of organizations, I mean, the Heat are kind of, I don't know if they're put on a pedestal, but they're certainly, with everything they've accomplished and kind of what they stand for, they're one of those organizations that other organizations look at and go, we'd like to replicate some of that. And I know in Toronto they do. I think that they've had meetings in the playoffs. They've had some incredible regular season contests. And I think there's a lot of mutual respect between the organizations on a broad level. So I don't think, that's just to answer that question. That's just my sense of it.
All right, so Michael, I guess two things that one quick thing. We'll close because I know that you got somewhere else you got to get to. And again, we appreciate the time. Follow him at Michael Grange for sure. Check out the story today. I mean, how do you think this ends? Because it does seem like the noise today continued to move towards Toronto. I'm having a hard time buying it completely. I'll just be honest here. Because I'm still trying to get my head around not just Portland not doing right by a guy who gave them everything for 11 years, and it does not seem like they were upfront with him and either about what they were going to be able to do for him or anything along those lines. I don't know that they outright lied, but they certainly did not accomplish what they told him they were going to try to accomplish, which was build around him. And I just have a hard time seeing an organization trade for a player like that on the other side of it and give up significant assets. But where do you think this ends up? Because it does seem like the drumbeat right now is Toronto, even if I'm still thinking there's a Philadelphia or some other team in the back here, because Toronto typically isn't this noisy when they do things like this.
Yeah,
that's the other thing.
That's true too. Right? That's a good point. They usually kind of try to move pretty low key. It was interesting. I was talking to one GM on the weekend, and he expected that Miami would get in. They hadn't. I mean, as has been widely reported, but he'd be shocked, he said, if he didn't think that they would kind of make one more run at it. And for that reason, and I guess I'm just so accustomed to players of this caliber sort of getting what they want. And for all the noise around KD last year, eventually ended up in Phoenix. And we can kind of go on down the list. The players generally get to where they want to go. And so I guess we'll see. I do understand. I share a little bit of your, I don't know, skepticism is the right word, but I would be surprised if he's here in Toronto. I guess I'm conditioned also that the Raptors have kind of come close on a lot of deals and pulled back in their own right. And I just don't 100% see the fit. But so I do think that Dame is likely to be traded this week. I think it's too noisy for it not to happen.
I agree with
but
that.
I still can't say 100% where he's going to go. In fact, I can
guarantee
I don't know 100% where he's going to go.
No, good, because you don't want to get aggregated the other way. I'll just say this, and I think this is what is going to drive Heat fans crazy here is, like you're saying, you don't really necessarily see the fit there, but we in Miami absolutely see the fit for Dame Lillard here. He's perfect for what they need. He is the guy who plugs in between Bam and Jimmy and takes them to the next level, and I don't know who the next one is. And so I think that's why Heat fans today, as they're seeing this Toronto thing, are like, well, wait a second. Okay, we understand that Portland doesn't want to deal with you, and we understand that you told them in mid-July, give us a roadmap, and they wouldn't. And then there hasn't been a lot of conversation. But go try again because we want this guy. I mean, the Heat think they can go to the finals, with their current roster, and they might end up being right. They don't want to look desperate for sure, and I understand that as a negotiating tactic. But also, like, this guy fits in Toronto. I'm kind of like, okay, so what does this make them? Like you say, I don't know who their 5 through 9 in their rotation are going to be, and I don't know that it gets him over the top. And he doesn't seem to really want to be there. So I don't know. The motivation seems to be more on the Heat side, but yet we're hearing about Masai, and then the whole idea is, are they driving up the price for the Heat as a rival? I think that's where Greg's question came from. But we'll see how it plays out. But Michael, we really appreciate you taking the time. Again, we know these things are fluid. You're busy, but it was a great piece, and I have great admiration for the reporting you've done over the years on that team and up there in general. So thank you very much for taking the time with us.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks to all you guys, and we'll see what happens.
Thanks.
I would say I'll see you at Media Day across the border, but Heat fans will get very upset at me about that. Have a good one, Mike.